close off by hearing your kind of quick thoughts on morphic resonance.
Yeah. So I discussed the myth of redemptive violence at length in an essay called Building a Peace Narrative. And I referred to Walter Wink's work in that. And identified, and this has been a theme in my work for a long time, the basic formula for change making that we kind of take for granted in this society, which is you identify a bad guy and then you defeat the bad guy by force. You can see this in US foreign policy. You can see this in a lot of the political discourse today. You can see this in health policy. What's the bad guy? What's the pathogen? What's the bad thing in myself? You see it in spirituality, even like this war mentality. And there's a lot of problems with it. One of which is that you never ask, why is the bad guy bad? Or what are the conditions that allow the bad guy to be so powerful? And in the economic sphere, you could ask, as you mentioned before, like, why are certain people seemingly so greedy? Like, what is the system that creates the apparent psychopaths that run a lot of corporations? Are they really psychopaths, or are they merely in a certain position in that game of musical chairs that sets them up to act like that? If you are always out about, okay, we're going to solve the problem by tearing down those bad guys, tearing down those awful people, those greedy people, those bankers, those this, that, and the other thing, you're never going to look at the system. You're never going to, and sometimes maybe you do have to fight Pluto, but if that's all you do, you're in endless war. So the principle of morphic resonance is one of the alternatives to solving problems through overcoming something by force. And the paradigm of overcoming by force, it's not only in our politics and Hollywood movies and stuff. It's also like at the core of what we understand to be technology, where you're moving masses around by exerting forces on them. And progress in technology means more and more accurately doing that with more and more force. That's called progress. And it hits the same kind of glass ceiling that we talked about earlier. Like, there are certain things you can do incredibly well that way. And there are certain areas that we are seeing in our society now where that way of engaging the world fails. It doesn't produce the miraculous results that we had come to expect through the previous miraculous results. And so, and especially if you're facing a situation where the evil powers that be are so much more powerful than you are in terms of the amount of force they can apply, we have to tap into a different theory of change. And the one that you mentioned is morphic resonance, which says that any change that happens in one place creates a field of change so that the same change happens in other places. And that means, so any act of kindness, any act of generosity, it creates a field of kindness, a field of generosity, which means that your individual choices in the most intimate circumstances, the most humble circumstances, have a bigger effect on the world than the force-based mentality could conceive of. And it also has a bearing on projects like Celo or some of the cryptocurrencies, other, all of these, whatever beautiful project you have, like sometimes part of the mind is like, but this is just such a tiny drop in the bucket compared to everything that's happening in the world. Yet, by devoting to something that calls to your love and to your care and to your ideals, you're also instigating a morphic field, a field of change. And it could spread in ways that don't depend on how much marketing force you have behind it. One of the ways a morphic field spreads is through inspiration. Somebody hears about it. And there's maybe even more mysterious ways that it spreads. But you can be sure that any devoted attempt to bring into materiality, bring into this material social world, the ideals of interconnection, ecology, interbeing, the uniqueness and relatedness of all things, like these principles that are behind the founding of Celo, for example, like any attempt to do that with devotion will have an impact far beyond what we could predict.